Lieutenant Commander Marcus "Ghost" Rodriguez stood on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, watching the sun dip below the horizon as another mission briefing ended in disappointment. For the third time that month, Admiral Harrison had pulled him from a critical SEAL support operation, citing concerns about his unconventional methods and reckless disregard for protocol. The other pilots whispered behind his back, calling him washed up, a has-been who couldn't follow orders. But Marcus knew the truth was more complicated than that. His unconventional methods had saved lives, even if they didn't look good on paper or fit neatly into the Admiral's idea of proper military conduct. Marcus had earned his wings flying FA-18 Super Hornets, but his real passion lay in close air support for special operations. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to read battlefield conditions, to anticipate where SEAL teams would need cover before they even knew it themselves. This intuitive flying style had made him legendary among ground forces, but it also made traditional Navy leadership nervous. The incident that changed everything happened during a routine training exercise off the coast of California. Marcus was providing air support for a simulated SEAL insertion when he noticed something the exercise controllers had missed. A civilian fishing vessel had drifted into the training area, directly into the path of the incoming helicopters carrying the SEAL team. Standard protocol dictated that Marcus should radio the exercise controller and wait for instructions. But he could see that by the time the message went through proper channels, the helicopters would already be committed to their approach. The fishing vessel showed no signs of awareness, its crew likely focused on their nets and oblivious to the military exercise unfolding around them. Without hesitation, Marcus broke formation and dove toward the fishing vessel, flying low enough to create a massive wake in the water. The sudden turbulence and roar of his engines got the fishermen's attention, and they quickly moved their boat out of the danger zone. The SEAL helicopters completed their insertion safely, none the wiser about how close they had come to disaster. But Admiral Harrison saw only an unauthorized deviation from the flight plan. In the debrief, he tore into Marcus with a fury that surprised even the seasoned pilots in attendance. "Your job is to follow orders, not to freelance like some cowboy," the Admiral shouted, his face red with anger. "I don't care what you thought you saw out there. You broke formation without authorization, and that's unacceptable." Marcus tried to explain about the fishing vessel, but Harrison wasn't interested in excuses. "You're grounded pending a full review of your fitness for duty," the Admiral declared. "Maybe some time on the beach will teach you the value of discipline." The grounding hit Marcus harder than he expected. Flying wasn't just his job, it was his identity. He had joined the Navy to serve something bigger than himself, to use his skills to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Now he found himself stuck behind a desk, filing reports and attending mandatory counseling sessions about following proper procedures. The other aviators in his squadron didn't know how to react. Some felt bad for Marcus, believing the punishment was too harsh for what amounted to good instincts and quick thinking. Others thought he had brought it on himself by refusing to play by the rules. The division created tension in the ready room, where pilots who had once trusted each other with their lives now found themselves taking sides. Marcus spent his days reviewing flight manuals and regulations, trying to understand how he could modify his approach to satisfy both his instincts and the Admiral's need for protocol. But every time he read about proper communication procedures and chain of command, he thought about that fishing vessel and wondered how many people might die while pilots waited for permission to act. The psychological evaluation was the worst part. The Navy psychiatrist, a well-meaning doctor who had never been in combat, asked probing questions about Marcus's relationship with authority and his need to be a hero. "Sometimes," the doctor suggested, "our desire to help others can become a compulsion that overrides our better judgment." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew that any sign of defensiveness would only extend his grounding. So he sat quietly and answered the questions, all while burning with the knowledge that he was being punished for the very qualities that made him effective in the first place. The weeks stretched into months, and Marcus began to wonder if his flying career was over. He watched from the sidelines as other pilots took missions he should have been flying, providing support for operations he had helped plan. The SEAL teams he had worked with before asked about him, but Admiral Harrison made it clear that Marcus was persona non grata. Then came the day that would change everything. Intelligence reports indicated that a group of American aid workers had been kidnapped by insurgents in a remote region of Afghanistan. The hostages were being held in a compound surrounded by civilian areas, making a traditional military assault extremely risky. The mission would require surgical precision and split-second timing. Admiral Harrison assembled his best pilots for the briefing, but Marcus wasn't invited. He learned about the mission secondhand from a junior officer who mentioned it in passing. The plan called for multiple aircraft to provide a complex pattern of support while SEAL Team 6 conducted the rescue operation. As Marcus listened to the details, a cold dread settled in his stomach. He knew that terrain had flown support missions in that exact region before his grounding. The area was notorious for unpredictable wind patterns and hidden anti-aircraft positions. The planned flight paths looked good on paper, but they didn't account for the practical realities of combat in that environment. He tried to voice his concerns to the mission planners, but his grounded status meant his input wasn't welcome. "The Admiral has made his position on your judgment very clear," one of the planners told him dismissively. "I think we can handle this without your help." Marcus watched the mission launch from the carrier's flight deck, helpless as his former squadron mates flew into what he knew would be a nightmare scenario. The radio chatter started optimistic, with pilots reporting clear skies and good visibility. But as they approached the target area, the tone began to change. The radio crackled with increasing urgency as the rescue mission unfolded exactly as Marcus had feared. "Viper 2, we're taking heavy ground fire from the northeastern ridge," came the strained voice of Lieutenant Peterson, one of Marcus's former wingmen. These positions weren't in the intelligence briefing. Marcus stood in the communication center, officially unauthorized to be there, but tolerated because of his expertise with the region. He watched the tactical display with growing horror as red symbols indicated enemy positions that the mission planners had missed. The SEAL team was already on the ground, committed to the rescue attempt, but the air support was struggling to adapt to the reality of the situation. "Ghost 6, this is Hammer Lead." The voice of Master Chief Santiago crackled over the radio from the ground. Santiago was the SEAL team leader, a man Marcus had worked with on a dozen previous missions. "We need immediate suppression of that ridgeline, or we're going to take casualties down here." But the pilots above were boxed in by their predetermined flight paths and rules of engagement. They couldn't deviate from the plan without specific authorization, and Admiral Harrison was back in the carrier's command center, trying to manage the mission by committee. Every decision had to flow through multiple layers of command, eating up precious seconds that the men on the ground didn't have. Marcus felt physically sick as he listened to the deteriorating situation. He knew exactly where those enemy positions were located, had spotted them during his previous flights over the area, but his warnings had been dismissed along with his credibility. Now good men were paying the price for Admiral Harrison's rigid adherence to protocol over practical experience. "Viper Lead, this is Control," Admiral Harrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Maintain your assigned sectors and wait for targeting confirmation from the AWACS aircraft." "Sir, with respect, we don't have time for confirmation," Viper Lead responded, his voice tight with stress. "The ground team needs support now." "Negative, Viper Lead. You will follow your assigned flight plan and engage only confirmed targets. I will not have this mission turn into a free-for-all because pilots think they know better than their commanders." Marcus closed his eyes, knowing that those words were directed as much at him as at the pilots currently in harm's way. The Admiral's need to prove his point about following orders was about to cost American lives. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior communications specialist, had been quietly monitoring all radio frequencies during the mission. He approached Marcus with a headset and a grim expression. "Sir, I've got a direct channel to the SEAL team that bypasses the normal command structure. It's technically for emergency communication only." Marcus looked at the headset, knowing that using it would probably end his military career permanently. But as he listened to Master Chief Santiago's increasingly desperate calls for air support, the choice became clear. Some things were more important than careers. "Hammer lead, this is Ghost Rider," Marcus spoke into the microphone, using the call sign Santiago would recognize from their previous missions together. "I'm not officially here, but I know where those guns are hidden." "Ghost Rider?" Santiago's voice carried both relief and disbelief. "I thought you were grounded, brother." "I am, but that doesn't mean I can't help. Listen carefully, because I can only do this once." Marcus began walking Santiago through the exact locations of the enemy positions, using landmarks and reference points that only someone with extensive knowledge of the area would know. Meanwhile, Marcus grabbed a nearby tactical radio and began transmitting on the frequency used by the attacking aircraft. "Viper flight, this is an unofficial observer with critical tactical information. The enemy positions you're looking for are not where your maps indicate." "Who is this?" came Viper Lead's confused response. "Identify yourself." "Call sign Ghost Rider. I've flown more missions in this area than anyone else in the fleet. Trust me or don't, but those SEALs are about to get overrun if you don't act fast." What happened next became the stuff of legend in naval aviation circles. Without waiting for official authorization, Viper Lead broke from his assigned pattern and followed Marcus's guidance to target the hidden enemy positions. One by one, the other pilots in the formation made the same choice, abandoning their rigid flight plans in favor of the tactical reality being painted by someone they couldn't even see. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated strikes silenced the enemy guns that had been pinning down the SEAL team, allowing them to complete their rescue mission and extract safely with all the hostages. It was a textbook example of how air support should work in special operations, with pilots and ground forces working as a seamless team. But as the aircraft returned to the carrier, Marcus knew that Admiral Harrison would not see the successful mission as vindication of his methods. Instead, the Admiral would focus on the unauthorized communications and the breakdown of command structure that had made the success possible. The confrontation came within hours of the aircraft landing. Admiral Harrison stormed into the communication center where Marcus was still monitoring the post-mission reports. "What the hell do you think you were doing, Commander? You had no authority to communicate with that mission." "With respect, sir, I was helping to save American lives," Marcus replied quietly. "The mission succeeded because the pilots had accurate information about enemy positions." "The mission succeeded despite your interference, not because of it," Harrison shot back. "You undermined my authority and encouraged other pilots to ignore their orders. That's mutiny, plain and simple." The argument that followed was witnessed by a dozen other personnel, including several senior enlisted men who had served with Marcus for years. They watched as Admiral Harrison threatened everything from court-martial to permanent grounding, his anger fueled by the embarrassing fact that his carefully planned mission had required an unauthorized intervention to succeed. But Marcus had allies he didn't know about. Master Chief Santiago had filed his own report about the mission, specifically crediting Ghost Rider's tactical guidance with the successful outcome. Other members of the SEAL team backed up his account, creating an official record that would be hard for Admiral Harrison to ignore. More importantly, word of the incident began to spread throughout the Special Operations community. SEAL teams, Marine Force recon units, and other Special Operations forces began asking specifically for Ghost Rider when they needed air support. They didn't care about his official status or Admiral Harrison's disapproval. They cared about results. And Marcus had delivered when it counted most. The tension reached a breaking point when SEAL Team 6's commanding officer, Captain Morrison, requested a private meeting with Admiral Harrison. Morrison was a legend in the special operations world, a man whose opinion carried weight throughout the Navy's leadership. What he said in that meeting was never officially recorded, but the outcome spoke for itself. Admiral Harrison found himself facing a choice between his personal vendetta against Marcus and the growing pressure from the special operations community that actually depended on close air support for their missions. The successful rescue had made Marcus a folk hero among the people who mattered most, and continuing to ground him was becoming politically untenable. The phone call that changed everything came at 0300 hours on a rainy Tuesday morning. Marcus had been sleeping fitfully in his quarters aboard the carrier, still officially grounded but increasingly aware that something was shifting in the political winds around his situation. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Morrison, and his words were direct and uncompromising. "Commander Rodriguez, you're being reassigned effective immediately. Pack your gear and report to Naval Air Station Oceana within 72 hours. You'll be briefing for a special assignment that requires your particular expertise." Marcus sat up in his bunk, fully awake now. "Sir, Admiral Harrison hasn't cleared me for active duty. I'm still under review for my fitness evaluation." "Admiral Harrison's review has been superseded by higher authority," Morrison replied with satisfaction, clearly evident in his voice. "It seems that certain people in very important places have taken notice of your recent contributions to mission success. Your grounding is hereby terminated." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt surreal after months of forced inactivity. Marcus found himself assigned to a classified program that officially didn't exist, working directly with SEAL teams on missions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in close air support operations. His new commanding officer was Commander Sarah Chen, a former test pilot who had transitioned into special operations support after losing her left leg in a training accident. Chen was everything Admiral Harrison wasn't: practical, flexible, and more concerned with results than with rigid adherence to protocol. "I've read your file, Rodriguez," Chen told him during their first meeting. "The official version and the unofficial version. What interests me is that every single special operations commander I've talked to requested you specifically for their air support. That tells me more about your abilities than any fitness evaluation ever could." The assignment was unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. Instead of flying predetermined missions with rigid parameters, he was embedded with SEAL teams during their planning phases, helping to design air support strategies that took advantage of his intimate knowledge of aircraft capabilities and battlefield conditions. The first mission under the new arrangement was a prisoner extraction in Yemen, where a captured CIA operative was being held in a compound surrounded by civilian areas. The mission parameters were impossible by traditional standards. Extract one person from a heavily defended position without causing collateral damage or creating an international incident. Marcus spent 3 days with the SEAL team, studying satellite photos and intelligence reports, but more importantly, sharing meals and building the kind of trust that made split-second communication possible. By the time they deployed, the air and ground elements were functioning as a single organism rather than separate units trying to coordinate through radio calls. The mission went flawlessly. Marcus's aircraft provided precisely timed distractions and cover fire that allowed the SEAL team to infiltrate the compound, locate the prisoner, and extract safely. But what made the mission legendary in special operations circles wasn't the technical execution. It was the way Marcus anticipated the team's needs without being asked. When the SEALs encountered unexpected resistance during their extraction, Marcus was already repositioning to provide covering fire from a different angle. When they needed a distraction to mask their movement through a civilian area, he was ready with a precisely timed sonic boom that drew attention away from their location. It was battlefield choreography at its finest, the kind of seamless coordination that only came from genuine understanding between air and ground forces. Word of the mission's success spread quickly through the tight-knit special operations community. Other SEAL teams began requesting the Ghost Rider specifically, and soon Marcus found himself flying more missions than he had before his grounding. But these weren't routine assignments. They were the most challenging operations in the Navy's inventory, missions that required the kind of flexible thinking that Admiral Harrison had tried to stamp out. The transformation in Marcus's reputation was remarkable. Pilots who had whispered about his career being over now spoke of him with something approaching awe. The Ghost Rider call sign became synonymous with missions that succeeded against impossible odds, and young aviators studied his techniques like medieval apprentices learning from a master craftsman. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Master Chief Santiago, the SEAL team leader from the hostage rescue that had marked Marcus's unofficial return to active duty, presented him with a custom patch during a ceremony aboard the USS Wasp. The patch bore the Ghost Rider call sign and the motto, "When protocol fails, trust flies true." "This isn't official Navy recognition," Santiago explained as he handed Marcus the patch. "This is something better. This is recognition from the people who trust you with their lives when everything else falls apart." The patch became a symbol throughout the Special Operations community. SEALs, Marines, and other Special Forces operators wore it as a sign of respect for an aviator who understood that sometimes the rulebook had to be thrown out the window in favor of human judgment and battlefield instinct. Admiral Harrison's reaction to Marcus's resurrection was predictable. He filed multiple complaints about unauthorized mission parameters and deviation from established protocols. But his complaints fell on deaf ears among commanders who cared more about mission success than adherence to peacetime regulations. The final vindication came during a congressional hearing on special operations effectiveness. When asked to identify the factors that contributed to the Navy's recent string of successful hostage rescues and high-risk extractions, Captain Morrison mentioned Ghost Rider by name. "The integration of experienced aviators into our planning process has been transformational," Morrison testified. "When pilots understand the ground situation and ground forces trust their air support, mission success rates increase dramatically. Commander Rodriguez exemplifies this kind of cooperation." The hearing was broadcast on military television networks, ensuring that Marcus's rehabilitation was complete and public. Admiral Harrison, watching from his office aboard the Abraham Lincoln, finally understood that his war against unconventional thinking had been lost decisively. Years later, when Marcus had been promoted to captain and was commanding his own air wing, young pilots would ask him about the secret to working with special operations forces. His answer was always the same. "Forget about looking good on paper. Focus on bringing everyone home alive. The rest is just politics." The Ghost Rider call sign lived on, passed down to other aviators who demonstrated the same commitment to mission success over protocol adherence. It became an honor that couldn't be awarded through official channels, something that had to be earned through the trust of the warriors on the ground. Marcus kept Santiago's patch in his office throughout his career, a reminder that the most important recognition came not from admirals or politicians, but from the people whose lives depended on his judgment when everything else failed. In a military culture often obsessed with following orders, Ghost Rider had proven that sometimes the greatest service came from knowing when and how to break the rules in service of a higher purpose. The legend of the aviator, the admiral cast aside, had become a testament to the power of practical wisdom over rigid bureaucracy, and a reminder that in the crucible of combat, trust and competence mattered more than rank or protocol. The call sign that made SEAL teams honor an outcast pilot had transformed him into something more valuable than any official recognition could provide. A warrior other warriors trusted with their lives.